Welcome to your first sample question, everybody. Now, we're still talking about the orphaned family members and how this relates to your upcoming ICCRC full skills exam. With parents and grandparents, when you worked through that lesson, you saw that we focused quite a bit on the requirements of the sponsor himself or herself. Now, those requirements are just about the same thing. So in these sample questions, in these 3 sample questions you're going to go through, we're going to talk about the requirements that the orphan family member has to meet. So here you have your first question. Now, Rodrigo is the person in this scenario, and Rodrigo is a 19-year-old Peruvian who arrived in Canada a few months ago as a permanent resident under the Nova Scotia Skilled Worker Program. While settling into his new life in Halifax, he received some terrible news. His parents had been killed in a car accident on their way home from a weekend trip in the mountains. Luckily, his 17-year-old brother was not in the crash and is now staying with his grandparents until they can figure out what to do. Rodrigo contacts Bernice, an RCIC who works in Peru, to explore whether or not Rodrigo can have his brother join him in Canada as a permanent resident. What would Bernice likely advise in this situation? So now we'll take a look at our potential answers. We have A, yes, Rodrigo can sponsor his brother under the family class because Rodrigo does not have any other relatives in Canada. We have B, yes, Rodrigo can sponsor his brother under the family class because his brother's parents are both deceased. We have C, no, Rodrigo cannot sponsor his brother because the brother can live with his grandparents. And we have D, no, Rodrigo cannot sponsor his brother because Rodrigo has not yet met his residency requirement. Alright, so take some time and work through this. Hopefully you can get the correct answer right away. And we'll go through each answer, each potential answer, one by one, just to make sure that you're on the right track to being able to solve this question quickly in case it pops up in your real ICCRC full skills exam. Now, as you looked through that scenario, there's a few really important pieces of information that will help you go towards answering this question perfectly. So some of those important pieces of information that we really need to analyze have to do with Rodrigo's status in Canada. So he is a permanent resident, which is one of the requirements, of course, of being able to sponsor a family member. And this is of course, for all of those family immigration streams. All right, we have his parents that had been killed, and we have the age of the brother. We have the brother's current living situation, and of course the intent of Rodrigo, which is to have his brother join him in Canada. Now, when we jump back to the question itself and see it again as a whole, this will help us work on our next few steps, which would be splitting this down and working through the potential answers to get the correct answer. So let's start with D here. Now we have D, no, Rodrigo cannot sponsor his brother because Rodrigo has not yet met his residency requirement. So if you think back to our first lesson on parents and grandparents, we had the requirements of the sponsor, which are very similar between that program and this stream as well. So with the sponsor requirements, remember the person has to be 18, a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, and live in Canada. There's the undertaking responsibilities, there's the LICO, there's the agreement. There's no evidence in what we looked at before stating that a permanent resident has to meet the residency requirements before he can sponsor someone. So with this, we can see that D is incorrect, and now we're left with 3 other options. So let's take a look at C. Now you're going to see that C is quite similar to D in that both potential answers tell us that no, Rodrigo cannot sponsor his brother. However, the reasons why he cannot sponsor the brother are a little bit different. Now, in order for us to work through C as an option, and to be able to understand why it's not the correct option, we need to take a look at Regulation 117. So 117 gives the definition of who can and who cannot be sponsored as an orphaned family member. Now, the part that is important for us is to take a look at F over here. And we can see that it says a person whose parents are deceased, under 18, not a spouse or common law partner, and then we have the family relations like we saw before. Now with this one here, there's no mention of grandparents, of the grandparents having to be deceased. So for that reason, we know that C is also incorrect. Now we're left with only 2 options, and as you can see, they both rely on yes, Rodrigo can sponsor his brother. However, the reasons why are different. Now when we take a look at A, we have yes, Rodrigo can sponsor his brother under the family class, and the reason why is the important one for us to decipher because the reasons why are different in A and B. So the reason why they said that Rodrigo can sponsor his brother in this case is simply because Rodrigo does not have any other relatives in Canada. So this probably makes you think about what we talked about previously, which was the lonely family member. And again, it's a good lesson on how important it is for you to really master each little element of the family class, because with this one here, you can see how they all relate to each other. Now, if you have a really good understanding of the lonely family member and how this works in the context of your exam, then you'd be able to answer this question pretty easily. So remember that in the scenario, they talked about Rodrigo, and they talked about his brother, and they talked about how his brother is living with his grandparents. As Rodrigo and the brother are our family, of course, our brothers, the grandparents would be the same. Now, when we think of the lonely family member, yes, when we look at Regulation 117(1)(h), the brother is certainly a relative who is a child of that mother or father. All right, however, we need to take a look at the grandparents. Now, Rodrigo could potentially sponsor the grandparents for permanent residency to Canada, and that makes him ineligible to sponsor a lonely family member. So with that, we understand that A is also incorrect, because from what we know about the lonely family member, we know that Rodrigo could potentially sponsor his grandparents. And that makes Rodrigo ineligible to sponsor anybody else as a lonely family member. Now let's jump ahead and take a look at B. So if you chose B, you know that this is the correct answer. A and B were quite similar in that both options gave you, yes, Rodrigo can sponsor his brother under the family class, but the reason why was slightly different. So remember, you have to have all of those elements correct in the potential answer in order for that answer to be the correct answer. Now with this one we have a very straightforward answer, and that is because his brother's parents are both deceased. Now when we compare this to Regulation 117(1)(f), we can see that this certainly does meet the requirements of this program because we have the parents being deceased and we have his brother being under 18. There's no mention of his brother being married or in a common law relationship. And when we look at those family relationships, we can see that the brother certainly qualifies because he is the child of the sponsor's mother or father. And a very big congratulations if you chose B as the correct answer. Then that is perfect. You really displayed a great knowledge of orphaned family members and how to translate, of course, all this knowledge into an exam setting. All right, so a big thank you for letting us help you on your road to passing the ICCRC Full Skills Exam. You have a couple more questions coming up. These questions will, of course, test you on a different area of the orphaned family members.